The agenda this week talked Canadian music with rock and roller Randy Bachman, surveyed irreplaceable artifacts from Canada's past, explored the complexities for Indigenous people related to Canada 150, and learned about what it's like to be a female chief of First Nations. The agenda's week in review begins with a trip across Canada on the Great Trail. We're going to show some pictures here because you have all seen some pretty spectacular things. And Sarah, I wonder if we can get you to start by telling us, Sheldon, you want to bring this image up? This is a tent and a sky unlike anything you'll ever see. Tell us about this, Sarah. What are we looking at?
Oh, that photo was taken in Ontario. I woke up early. I knew I wanted to see the sunrise on that day. I usually walk until I'm tired and set up camp, and that happened to be the place that I got tired in.
Do you know where that is?
Somewhere between Sault Ste. Marie, or just a little bit past Sault Ste. Marie, actually, on the trail.
I was going to say, it looks very much like Northern Ontario, so that makes sense.
Yeah, Northern Ontario, yeah.
All right, Sheldon, let's bring the next image up as well. This is you in Canmore, Alberta. And again, just another spectacular shot. What do you love about this one?
My mom's friend hiked with me for 2 months. He's in his 50s, and he took a month off of work to come walk with me, and that was incredibly special. So for me, that calls those memories a little bit. But yeah, Canmore's a beautiful place. It's a pleasure to be walking in it.
And we have one more. This one's also from Alberta, but it looks very different from the previous shot. Just a big, vast field and huge open blue skies. Where's that?
Yeah, that was kind of walking into some of the prairies. I was walking in the fall at that point. And again, kind of a typical scene. I'm a bit of a prairie kid, so I loved days walking under those skies. Those are some of my favorite days.
How long were you hiking each day during this course of your voyage?
It really varied. I walked anywhere from 20 to 60 kilometers in a day, and usually 5 kilometers an hour, so sometimes some very long days, but depending on who I was walking with, or on the weather occasionally, or on if I came across someone who wanted to share a story or something like that too.
Right. Now, I understand you were a vegetarian when this trip started. Are you still?
I kind of realized partway through that I was trying to be so open to so many experiences as I was going across, but I was closing myself off to a lot of culture by saying no to food that was offered to me. So I made a decision maybe 6 months into my walk that if someone offered me food, I would accept it, and gladly. So I got to sample a lot of different things as I crossed the country.
Gotcha. Okay, Diane, we're going to show a few of your pictures as well. I love this one off the top here with you and your hat. Back to the camera in the foreground and the beautiful hills of Charlevoix, Quebec in the background. What can you tell us about that one?
Well, I'm just about finished the Traversée de Charlevoix, which was a really beautiful but tough single-track trail through the Charlevoix Mountains, and I'm enjoying a moment of just off in the distance is Bay St. Paul, and I know I'm probably going to get my first shower in a couple of weeks, and and like Sarah, look forward to some food. So yeah, it was an extremely beautiful area, and one I'd never been to before. But I encourage Canadians, forget France, go to Charlevoix in Quebec. You'll get the cheese, you'll get the good wine, and you'll get the French culture.
Okay, let's bring you to the province of Ontario, and you went to beautiful Muskoka. Tell us about that.
The photograph was taken by a great independent filmmaker I worked with there named Jeremy Muntz. And as you can see, I'm walking the bike, which was a very common thing when I was on my mountain bike. I was usually pushing it through trails. But yeah, just absolutely stunning, beautiful fall. And certainly I live in BC normally, and I don't on the coast see these kinds of colors. So it was spectacular. When
you have to go over water, what do you do with the bike?
I have help from people. We ship things forward. Like I also in the winter snowshoe, right? So I get help from lots of people. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of Canadians have helped me along the way. It's a really grassroots operation. I never know where I'm going to be or when I'm going to be there. So when I finished snowshoeing at the end of March, we shipped that stuff off, and my co-producer arranged for my bike sent to me. I had to do a 50K section, and then we were gifted a canoe actually by a company in Ontario called Novacraft Canoe. And I don't take corporate sponsorship at all on this journey because I want to stay with my heart while I'm making the art. But I do accept gifts, and they kindly gifted me a canoe to use for the rest of the journey. and I'm going to gift it to the community of Tuktoyaktuk when I get up there in 2 years' time.
Nice.
And yeah.
Have you, I asked Sarah this question, so I should ask you as well, have you seen much wildlife during the course of your journey?
Yeah, I've seen a few bears and some moose and porcupines. I actually, right when I left Newfoundland, about day 10, I rolled out of my tent at sunrise for a morning pee and looked up and realized I was surrounded by, I don't know, 6 or 7 moose. And it's with those moments you're like, yeah, I don't really have my camera with me right now, and I'm about the height of their ankles. But anyway, yeah, I've had some intimate moments with animals on this journey.
And obviously, you're a cool enough customer that you don't panic in those kind of circumstances, but you get a little bit nervous?
No, actually, I mean, you know what I tell everybody is fear is like that little tiny man in The Wizard of Oz that's hiding behind the curtain. I mean, we give shadow way too much space, you know? It's like there's nothing really to be afraid of. Usually most fear is the fear that you carry with you when you go out there. It doesn't really exist out there at all. And it's just an emotion, you know? It's not a real thing, so...
Let's do one more picture for you, Diane, and this one was in New Brunswick. You are on skis, and again, just spectacularly beautiful. What do you remember about this?
The bridge to PEI is not too far behind me, and I had some really beautiful flat trails to ski on, cross-country ski on, pulling a sled right to Moncton.
This is the Minister of Heritage for Canada, Mélanie Joly, who had this to say a few months back. We know that the relationship with our Indigenous groups, that's not really a great thing to say, but anyway, and communities in the past 150 years has not been perfect. We're committed as a government to make sure that the next 150 years are way better. So this is exactly why we made sure that in the context of Canada 150, we would celebrate the reconciliation with Indigenous people. How would you, Niigaan, characterize the efforts within Canada 150 to sort of include and accommodate Indigenous voices and perspectives?
Well, I think, Steve, what you picked up on in the quote, which has a similar sounding to what the Governor General recently said, Indigenous peoples, this entire country for 150 years has been built off the backs of Indigenous people. And Indigenous peoples have been really treated as a sort of a mining resource. There are things to take from, resources to take from, words to take from. On every Canadian driver's license right now, there is the reminder that there are important things like Indigenous languages or relationships or treaties. And, if there's anything that Canada 150 has perhaps not done quite as well, and I certainly haven't seen it, is the reminder that while the syrupy sweetness of the flag or the maple leaf is important to talk about, how we got there, whose land was taken from in order to make that maple syrup is probably the most important discussion of all. And to truly be Canadian is to be a complex peoples. And any sense of a unitary narrative, a unifying narrative, which talks about only those parts that ended up in what we might think of as UN peacekeepers without talking about the fact that Indigenous people taught Canada what UN peacekeeping was all about, is to tell a narrative that's one-sided and frankly not helpful.
Vanessa, I mean, you heard me pick up on that, our Indigenous groups, and I haven't spoken to the minister about this. I have no idea whether, I think I'm on solid ground in saying she probably wasn't trying to convey a perpetuation of a colonial attitude by a minister of the Crown to Indigenous peoples. And let's also recognize she's in her second language there. She's a Francophone politician. So she may not have understood the nuance of what she was saying. Having said that, you don't like that expression, do you? I saw you bristle at it when I read it as well.
No, and I think it's far too common, actually. I think that happens a lot amongst politicians, referencing our First Nations, our Aboriginal people, and it goes back to this discussion against kind of the nuance and the interesting complexities of a Canadian cultural mosaic or multicultural mosaic, which I don't agree with in terms of the relationship between Indigenous peoples and Canada. And certainly when Niigaan referenced, building Canada off the backs of Indigenous people and taking those lands, and that's not just historical, that's currently happening. And this new kind of form of reconciliation is emerging. I've heard terms economic reconciliation. I've heard things like Indigenous youth are the fastest growing population, and they are going to be the ones that kind of jump into the economy, right? So for me, they're human capital, and that's how Indigenous peoples are still being talked about. Even with residential schools, it was Indigenous youth being viewed as laborers, and that narrative hasn't changed.
So just so I'm clear, you're not trying to put a chill on free speech, but you are trying to point out the nuances behind some fairly frequently used expressions
Right.
which may pack a bigger wallop than people realize.
Right, right. I mean, our is the possessive. And given the paternalistic relationship that historically has been present and it continues to be present with the Indian Act and other politicians, you know, it does mean a lot. It's not just a slip of the tongue.
True. Let me read this to you. This is from the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which characterized Canada 150 as an opportunity for Canadians to take stock of the past, celebrating the country's accomplishments without shirking responsibility for its failures. I guess a two-part question here. Does that sound about right to you?
Well,
as a mission statement.
Entire libraries have been written on deconstructing that and the rest of the TRC. These are good words. Whether they're good actions is another matter.
Well, that's the second question, which is, do you think that can be done? All of the above.
I like to look at the world through rose-tinted glasses. I like to think all things are possible. It's up to the individuals, it's up to the government, and it's up to the people whether or not they do achieve this. I like to think it is possible. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of restructuring of systematic views of life, but I'm going to say yes, but we're not there yet.
Yes, but. Niigaan, you know, there are obviously millions of Canadians who would like to celebrate the fact that Confederation happened 150 years ago and that we're a, relatively speaking, successful example of a democratic society around the world. Can Canada do that, celebrate its accomplishments, while at the same time acknowledging the failures along the way?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I hearken back to what Drew said a moment ago about this is an opportunity for dialogue. That's the thing that I've said over and over and over again in the many times I've been asked to comment on Canada 150 is there's nothing wrong with celebrating a Canadian like Romeo Dallaire or Nellie McClung, or insert any other Canadian, great Canadian in their accomplishment. However, it is at the same time equally as important to talk about how did we get here? How did we get here to have those kinds of Canadians who achieve these great things on either the national, local, international stage? They got here, they own houses, they have citizenship, they live under laws and policies which have all been built on the backs of Indigenous people. And the Indigenous peoples have participated in those things, helping the country build. And so that narrative is so important because it is truly to be a Canadian is to understand that we actually had a path in which we got here, and that path was not particularly rosy. So if we're going to talk about the rosy stuff, we need to really talk about how we got to the rosy stuff.
All over the country, in every community, we see issues of drug addiction, we see issues of youth alienation, we see issues of suicide, we see issues of mental health, and we're told these issues are all far more urgent on reserve. Is this your experience as well?
Yeah, I think you know, a lot of the communities share a lot of those types of problems. You know, and it's not the easiest thing to, you know, to try and resolve overnight. You know, like things aren't going to happen, you know, just like that. You know, we can do what we can as leadership to try and drive that particular agenda, but really it comes down to the entire community and wanting to make that change and try to address the root causes of those issues and tackle them.
Do you see that there? Do you see that desire there to address the root causes?
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, our youth council is very active in, you know, trying to promote that, and they've recently contacted the We Matter campaign to come and facilitate a workshop in our community to do that. The We Matter campaign is fairly new. I think it's about a year old, but it was started by a couple of kids from Hay River, Northwest Territories, and they just go out and they try to promote life promotion. Is what they do. Yeah, they get all kinds of, like, I guess they have videos and stuff like that that they promote and share with Indigenous youth across the country. And what they're doing now is, from what I understand, is they're going into communities and actually training other youth within those communities to host these types of workshops so that they can carry those out in the region. So it's pretty good, and I think having youth driving that is important.
Okay, let's talk.
Youth listen to youth, so
indeed,
yeah.
Indeed. Chief Linda, let's talk economy. 2,500 people in your part of the province. What do they do for a living?
We actually have a high unemployment rate. Our largest employer is the First Nation administration itself. We have a band-operated school, which employs a significant amount of individuals as well. The economy on Manitoulin Island is very poor. In earlier years, it was an economy based on tourism. Obviously, we're on an island and only have one bridge for access.
One bridge and one ferry.
24 hours or 12 months a year, and a ferry for 4 or 5 months a year. And with the economy in general, the Canadian and American economy, which used to drive the tourism on Manitoulin Island, has declined over the years. So we face, we're starting to face significant poverty levels. I think when we talk about economy, we have to look back at where we came from to where we are at today. History of my community was, our economy was vast with fishing, making maple syrup, making sugar, some forestry.
Any of that still happen?
Very minimal, very minimal. Our land base is very small, so we don't have the land to do those economic ventures.
Now here's the thing, if things aren't working well in a particular community, they leave, they go somewhere else where there is work. And that's been a story of many people over the years. Because of your attachment to the land, that's not an option for you, right?
No.
So you got to make it work where you are.
That's right.
How tough is that to do?
It's tough. Our traditional territory is very large, but our community can't just pick up and go there. History tells us that Manitoulin Island was once to be a reserve for the Indians, the whole of Manitoulin. When the settlers came and found good farming land, good access to the Great Lakes, that's when Indian Affairs came in again, and the superintendent at the time signed a treaty with the First Nations. And the history of that treaty is that there was a huge miscommunication. My family is a signatory to that treaty, and our oral history tells us that what was communicated then on that paper was not communicated verbally.
Let's just hone in on the name here for a second. The Gerard India Bazaar kind of implies that there's one culture at play here, but in fact, let me ask the filmmaker, how many different cultures would you see if one were to go down there?
Well, it's generally described as a South Asian bazaar, but the sort of Indian moniker is prominent, maybe because they arrived first. But I'd say Indo-Pakistani, and keep in mind that within India, there's 29 states and other territories,
Sri Lankan
and they
as well?
Well, also Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal. Even there's, I think, a Tibetan business, and so basically from that region of South Asia. But even the Indian stores are all quite different from south to north, east to west. There's quite a bit of diversity.
Well, this is what I want to get at. Chandan, I want to find out whether or not the Sikhs all shop at the Sikh-owned businesses, whether the Pakistani population all shops at the Pakistani-run businesses, the Sri Lankans at the et cetera, et cetera. Is that how it works?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. Especially not, I mean, it's hard for me to speak for other businesses, but especially for our own. The offering that we carry, it's so diverse amongst different cultures. So a sari that we carry, someone from a different culture could definitely wear it. But specifically, what my dad was doing at a time, he was talking to his customers and saying, hey, what do you usually wear at your wedding? And then Ismaili people would come and say, we wear white saris. But traditionally in Punjabi or Hindus, you would never wear white on your wedding day. So he would listen to his customers and be like, all right, what are you looking for exactly? He would sort of cater to them, start carrying what they were looking for, and then you would see more and more and more different types of diverse ethnic communities coming in.
That raises another question for me, which is, Kanwaljit, I want to ask you, the part of the world that you originally came from can be a very troubled part of the world from time to time. And yet it seems like, you correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like most of the different ethnic groups that inhabit the bazaar get along pretty well. Is that the case?
Yeah, the event when it started before, there was hardly Pakistani and Indian only. And I know there's about 10 members only. It was getting harder and harder. On one side, there was some racial problem over there. The second, and we was not getting along together. But when we had some problem, I said, listen, you guys are entrusting me as the head of the association. Period. Keep it in mind, we are in business. We are not a politician. So whosoever wants to become a politician, write it down on the out of his sword, I'm a politician, so that the customer won't go. Somehow they agree.
Let me go to Gulshan with a little follow-up here. Is it your impression that the problems from back on the other side of the world have or have not made their way into the bazaar here in Toronto?
Well, what's interesting for me, it's interesting because often people think Muslims are all the same. It's, you know, in terms of how they believe, but Muslims are very, very diverse. And me being an Ismaili Muslim, which is a sect of the Muslims, often I have other Muslims coming into the restaurant saying, are you halal? Right? Because I come from a sect that is a lot more liberal. So I see that more than I do in the microcosm of Little India. So for example, Chandan and I probably have more in common because, you know, we've both been raised here. So we have our values and our ethics, and that might be more in common than I would have somebody who's come from India or Pakistan like 3 or 4 years ago. So that's kind of what I see in terms of differences. Old and new. Let me ask Nina then, how well, in your impression, the rest of the community has embraced the whole South Asian phenomenon on Gerrard Street?
If you're talking about the residents as well,
yeah.
Or I think in general it is a unique area, and it has been documented as such in sort of academic studies that the Gerrard India Bazaar formed basically in a kind of, I'd say, Caucasian European kind of neighborhood. So the surrounds are not necessarily South Asian. There's a few, of course, and when everyone moved in, they moved in over their stores. But it is a bit different that way. However, that said, in general today, I'd say the residents love the bazaar. They complain about, you know, if there's noise. I mean, sometimes there's, you know, bump ups in terms of belief systems about, you know, on Independence Day for either India or Pakistan, you know, too many people hooting and hollering or whatever. But that's typical grumpy residents, and probably an aspect of being near the beach, you know. And they're very active residents.
And would you agree with the observation that in the main, people have put their old world politics behind them and are looking for something different here?
I would say 100%, and that's one of the things that I found very inspiring about this film, and you know, it is, I think, a very Canadian story of endeavor, where people came here from all over. They shared, you know, they came to the bazaar because they shared a common language, or a few common languages, and common culture to sort of bolster themselves and adapt to this new world. And in general, they've, you know, collectively prospered and done very well. Not everyone has, of course, and that's part of the aspect of the changing bazaar today.
How do you feel that we don't do as good a job giving props to our homegrown talent as opposed to overseas?
Well, my first record, we had to change our name and call ourselves Guess Who to get any airplay in Toronto. We were a Winnipeg band. That happened over and over and over. With BTO, I put out a record last year, couldn't get any airplay. It was the best record I put out in a long time. They just don't care. Got great reviews in England and Germany and the States and everything. It got airplay. And there's not the sales that there used to be. But I find a very weird thing with the Canadian government in that on the front end, if you have a band, you can do a demo of your songs. You can send it into Factor, which is funding to assist Canadian talent on record, and get 10, 20, up to 25 grand, I think, to do your album. And then when you get a good song from that, you apply for Video Fact, and you get another chunk of money to do a video, which they then mandate radio stations must play 5 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, whatever it is. It changes all the time. Videos and music on radio and television. And then when the band makes it big, the taxes are so huge here and punishing, the band lives somewhere else and pays taxes. So on the front end, the Canadian government puts out this money and they mandate the law to play Canadian talent. The minute the band they start making money, they leave Canada. Okay. They come back for Medicare, right? Because they keep a cottage somewhere, their granny's house or whatever, and they come back to get their Juno Awards and their Orders of Canada, and it's right back to France or Bermuda or England or the States where taxes are better.
You're not describing yourself there, though, because you've
No,
never
I'm
left.
not.
You stayed.
But if you and I took 10 minutes after the show, because I don't want to expose my friends, and made a list of 30 to 50 to 100 Canadian entertainers, I don't just mean musicians, songwriters, but the Jim Carreys, the comedians, the writers who write the movie scripts and the producers, and the athletes. There's like billions and billions of dollars out there that could be paid in Canada on tax that would help Joe Canada. The money that's being spent on Canada Day on fireworks is ridiculous. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm playing programs with other musicians so kids in school can get a backpack to eat on Saturday and Sunday. They get a backpack with orange juice and apple juice and then a donut or a Twinkie because they don't have food at home. We have starving people here and money going up in fireworks. And they, like I said, they pay for the music industry in the front end, and nobody comes here and pays taxes.
Okay, I gotta unpack a whole lot of stuff you just said there because there's a bunch of things I need to follow up on.
Okay.
No, I'm just going to follow up on it. What do you mean Randy Bachman can put out a new album and he can't get airtime in Canada? How is that possible?
Good question. I don't know the answer.
Well, okay, one of the possibilities is that the kinds of stations that were everywhere when you were just starting out are now few and far between, right? There's very few top 40 radio stations left in the country, right? So already your universe...
Well, even the classic rock stations wouldn't play it. But I'm not the only one. There's a new album out by Eric Clapton, Mark Knopfler, Neil Young, Stephen Stills, Hart, me, zillions of others, bands. They can't get any airplay.
Q107 wouldn't play your stuff?
No, they're so busy playing the old rotation that they won't play anything new. And I keep saying, why don't you do a then and now? Here's Eric Clapton then and play Sunshine of Your Love, and here's Eric's new album right now, Forever Man or whatever it's called, or Traveling Blues or something. Give us a break. We are the reason you radio stations are in business.
Now, I have to make a little confession here. I am a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, okay? Having said that, I think this is amazingly cool what you've got here, and I'm not going to go anywhere near it and touch it because I know it's gloves only to touch it. That's the Rockets hockey stick.
This is one of them. This is 50 goals in 50 games. Now, I should point out that this will not be in the hall. We weren't able to bring down to you the artifact that will be in the hall, but you are looking at the actual stick. What we will have in the hall is one of the Rockets' uniforms, one of his jerseys, and the way that we present that and contextualize that is that Richard was much more than a hockey player, that many people have talked about the opening shot in the Quiet Revolution, the whole Clarence Campbell, a debate in 1955, and that, Richard emerges as this powerful symbol of a changing and transforming Quebec. So we use Richard and we use hockey with respect to those early days and the importance of the Quiet Revolution in Quebec.
Well, you mentioned Clarence Campbell, and just for those who don't follow hockey too much, Campbell suspended Richard.
That's right.
Which started a riot.
It did.
Because the Habs went on to lose that Stanley Cup because they didn't have the Rocket in the lineup.
This is back in 1955.
This is, right, mid-1950s.
Right.
And so he had, my recollection of the story is he had to get on the radio and tell people to calm down.
He did.
Or the riots would have continued.
He absolutely did, and he never saw himself as this powerful symbol of, sort of Quebec growth and transformation. And this was a burden that he carried, but this is an important part of the story, and whether or not he saw himself in that manner, he became this sort of potent symbol.
Now this stick's 60, it's more than 60 years old here. It's so funny, first of all, this crazy old black tape, you don't see that anymore. It's a straight stick, you don't see that anymore, they're all curved. It's wood, you don't see that anymore.
That's true.
And he signed it with the 50 goals in 50 games on it at the other end there. That is a truly iconic piece of history right there.
We think all of these things are, and we think each tells a story, a very Canadian story. What the New History Hall tries to do, Steve, is to personalize those stories. So everything here is a personal story, and many different perspectives, as you can see. Whether it's a refugee family, an important athlete, hockey player, the whole story of the development of Canada through the Fenian raids and the assassination of McGee, or indeed making sure that the indigeneity of the country is there at the beginning of the hall, and also woven throughout each of the three galleries, and that story becomes an important part of Canadian history today. So all of it's there.
We have one medal sitting in the middle of this table.
We do.
You want to tell us what that is?
This is Lester Pearson's Peace Prize that he received in 1957.
The Nobel Peace Prize.
This is it. This is the actual Nobel Peace Prize. It was very generously loaned to us by Global Affairs Canada and Mr. Pearson's family. This is a wonderful example of Canada's contribution to the world. He, of course, is presented with this for his efforts at resolving the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. And we think it continues to tell a great story about the role that Canada has really come to play in the world. And I should point out to you that there are other stories in the hall as well. I mean, there's the story of the struggle for justice and equality, for example, for the LGBTQ community. So we have a number of stories that look to how Canadians have contributed both domestically and abroad on issues that deal with human rights, conflict resolution, just even the development of the Canadian society in general.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, June 30th, 2017. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page at periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.